If you're looking for games to play on a budget PC, you've come to the right place. This is the list of the best games that will run well even if your PC is old enough to run for president with the computing power of a potato. So, even if your hardware is old or your skill level is low, come check out these games. Eric wakes up on a treacherous island without his son, and he soon comes to realize that surviving a plane crash was the easy part of this adventure. A survival horror game, The Forest incorporates most of the standard elements associated with the genre, including crafting tools, building shelter, and finding food. Eric must also deal with the locals who happen to be cannibals, although they are not necessarily evil or good. The Forest is a must-play for survival or horror fans. While not especially striking in the visual department, its gameplay and story are rock solid. A sequel called Sons of the Forest launched in February 2023, but that requires more juice under a computer's hood. Well, there are probably no players who wouldn't recognize this title. The second installment of the popular FPS game series is often considered the best one due to the engaging story and the iconic villain, Handsome Jack, who single-handedly carries the narrative. Furthermore, Borderlands 2 is a solid shooter experience that is highly entertaining, especially in multiplayer mode. It will work well online, as well as offline, in the form of a traditional couch co-op. However, if you're more of a lone wolf, nothing is stopping you from looting Pandora through and through on your own. Alternatively, you can also read about other great recommendations for fans of single-player FPS. Valve does a fantastic job optimizing its games, with pretty much all of them playing well on low-end PCs. Portal 2 is no exception, although the game can look pretty fantastic with high-end graphics. But even watered down, and with the settings on low, Portal 2 is one of the most engaging and entertaining puzzle adventures ever produced. Most players come to experience the hilarious storyline and stellar voice action, only to be completely gripped by Portal's unique brand of gameplay. What's even better is that Portal 2 can be enjoyed with a friend, thanks to an entirely separate cooperative storyline. This means there's twice as much to see and do in Portal 2, and it should all run smoothly with low requirements. When writing about low-spec games, we couldn't have forgotten about Among Us. Despite its initial launch in 2018, the title became a global hit 2 years later during the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. The game's premise is simple. You and a group of 4 to 15 players are aboard a spaceship, working to complete various tasks. However, among your crew members, one or more imposters are bent on sabotaging your mission by eliminating everyone. It's definitely one of the best multiplayer games that run on potato PCs. Every weapon is a hunter weapon. We added WoW Classic to this list when it launched back in 2019. For years later, it's time to journey to Northrend for the climactic battle against Arthas. This 2009 expansion to the original world of Warcraft is some of the best WoW storytelling that Blizzard ever did. The refinements it made to the gameplay and endgame scaling make Wrath far more approachable than Classic was, and there are more things for players in smaller guilds or with less raiding experience to actually do. And after years of player requests, an official hardcore mode is coming to Blizzard servers starting August 24, 2023. There's a lot to love in the original version of Blizzard's MMO Classic, especially if you like games of this era in the first place. Wrath uses the modern WoW engine, including the water engine, but Blizzard reused the original WoW's textures and assets. The result is a game that runs just fine on a low-end PC, including Carrizo-powered AMD Ultrabooks and Intel integrated graphics. Who would have thought you didn't need a powerful PC to join Lara Croft on an epic adventure in the first installment of a rebooted trilogy? Now that you do, there's nothing stopping you from trying it out. Tomb Raider transports you to a mysterious island where you must fend for yourself in the midst of the wilderness. The gameplay focuses mainly on exploration, fighting enemies, and solving puzzles. Undoubtedly, watching the protagonist grow from a young explorer to a resolute heroine is truly delightful. Whether someone is a League of Legends or a Dota 2 player, they can't deny that the former has left a huge impact on the gaming world. League of Legends is a MOBA that can be difficult for newcomers to jump into, especially after the game has been on the market for so long, but players won't need an especially jacked PC to get the title running. LOL is an entity unto itself, a beast of a game that dominates lives and continuously evolves. It might not cost money or hardware, but LOL demands time. This one will be perfect for enthusiasts of fantasy settings. Dragon Age Origins is an RPG game with a semi-open world that casts you as a Grey Warden, a member of the legendary Order of Warriors. Evil comes back to haunt the residents of Thedas, and only you can save them from suffering. The Ultimate Edition contains the expansion, Awakening, and 9 content packs. However, the best thing is that even budget laptops can run the game, thanks to relatively low minimum system requirements. The Hotline Miami games both received rave reviews for their unique settings, gameplay, and story. The first game casts you as a nameless character nicknamed Jacket by the community. The game takes place in a gritty, stylistically distinctive version of Miami in 1989. Your task? Kill off the local Russian mob. Hotline Miami 2 deals with the aftermath of your actions and the events that led to them, providing additional context around the story. It also skips ahead to 1991 to answer the question of what happened to Jacket after your rampage. Compared to some other low-spec PC games, Subnautica requires slightly more juice under the hood, which is to be expected of a 2018 open-world release. However, Unknown Worlds game entered early access in 2014, and its system requirements are more in line with projects from that era. Consequently, this title is a great option for users with budget computers who are searching for an immersive 3D experience with a reasonably sized map for exploration. Crash landing on planet 4546b, Riley Robinson finds herself alone in a world consisting primarily of water. In order to survive and perhaps find a way off this rock, the protagonist must scour the ocean for resources, a process that is just as likely to produce beautiful or nightmarish sights. Where Cult of the Lamb puts the player in control of a cult, in Resident Evil 4 you're fighting a cult. To be clear, this is not the new, remade Resident Evil 4, but the original version from way back in 2005. As much fun as the remake is, the 2005 game still punches way above its weight class. RE4 ditches the isometric, over-shoulder perspective of the original games and aims more for action and horror as opposed to the slower-paced gameplay featured on the PS1. Those of you who are comfortable with modding might want to look into the Resident Evil HD project. While it won't make the 2005 version look like it was made in 2023, there are a number of real graphical improvements here. Left 4 Dead 2 will never die, or that at least seems to be the case. Valve's co-op shooter has been out for more than a decade, and the game's popularity has hardly waned. 4 players must work together to blast their way through creative levels overflowing with zombies, some of which are quite creative. Even in 2009, Left 4 Dead 2 was not a particularly taxing game, consequently, modern systems should not have any trouble running this title on minimum or even maximum settings. Fearless players seeking a thrilling adventure should consider picking up Outlast 2, acclaimed as one of the top survival horror titles. Its story follows Blake Langerman, a cameraman trapped in a remote Arizona village. His only mission is to find his wife and escape this nightmarish place. While it doesn't reinvent the gameplay mechanics of its predecessor, it still offers an experience that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Armed with a camera and devoid of any means of self-defense, you must rely on your resourcefulness to survive. Overall, it unquestionably deserves its position among the best low-end PC games. Grasshopper manufacturer's Killer is Dead garnered a mixed reception upon release, mostly thanks to its similarities to the developer's more popular No More Heroes games and some rather awful mini-games. However, the hack-and-slash title's positives still shine roughly a decade following its debut. Firstly, the game's stylized graphics have aged beautifully, arguably better than most mid-tier 2013 releases with more realistic visuals. Secondly, and more importantly, Killer is Dead's combo-driven combat is incredibly fun, and it holds up well on repeat playthroughs. Killer is Dead was never a very demanding game, and in 2023, most low-spec laptops are likely to be able to run it. Due to its unique art style, the title still looks decent even when its graphics settings are set to as low as possible. Do not underestimate this indie gem just yet. It may seem like another platformer with roguelike elements, but here it is on the list of best laptop games. Your mind will change in no time as you get completely sucked into the beautifully illustrated levels and hunt for better weapons. Dead Cells is extremely fun, and thanks to its procedurally generated mazes, you will play it repeatedly without getting bored. Batman, Arkham Asylum, City, and Origins are all good games for low-end PCs, and they come with the added bonus of being quite cheap. Arkham Asylum might drop players in a smaller-scale playground than its successors, but this translates to a strong and focused campaign. Visually, the 2010 game has aged extremely well, thanks in part to its gothic and stylish architecture. Arkham Asylum is one of the greatest and most influential action games of all time. Rocksteady's combat system inspired projects like Middle-earth, Shadow of Mordor, Mad Max, and Remember Me, and none of those titles are as great as Arkham Asylum. We're sticking with Arkham City in this update, rather than moving on to one of the newer titles. Arkham Asylum is, to be sure, still an excellent game, and it runs on an even lower spec system than Arkham City. But between the two of them, Arkham City is the better overall Batman game. Batman's overall bag of tricks gets polished, and AC offers you playing time as characters like Catwoman, with her own distinct moveset and animation style. Arkham City feels as though it genuinely captures what it would be like to be Batman. The game also has a clever twist explaining why you face a never-ending army of thugs. If you want to find out if you're going to like the Arkham game series, we'd say this is the best one to try. If you need something even gentler on system specs, try the original Arkham Asylum. Fallout: New Vegas is another cult classic that deserves a place in our collection of low-spec games. It immerses you in a post-apocalyptic wasteland torn apart by warring factions. Even though you're an ordinary adventurer, your decisions wield tremendous influence over New Vegas and its inhabitants. The gameplay closely resembles that of Fallout 3, as you navigate an open world, complete quests, and face off with various enemies. The game also retains the iconic VATS combat system, allowing you to pause time and target specific body parts of your foes. Additionally, it features an expanded arsenal compared to its predecessor, with weapons that can be further customized. The story and dialogue are excellent, but then again, that's hardly surprising. After all, the game was developed by Obsidian. Compared to most other low-spec games recommended in this article, Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition requires slightly more power under the hood. However, the 1999 original game and its HD version are also readily available and can be run on a toaster. A contender for the greatest strategy title of all time, AoE 2 combines city building and war management to create a deep and potentially endless experience. Besides a graphical upgrade, the Definitive Edition primarily sticks to implementing quality-of-life improvements, most of which enhance the gameplay in small but welcome ways. There are also a few new campaigns and modes, so this package is not simply a more beautiful version of a timeless classic. This indie game is a prime example that there's no need for beautiful graphics or sophisticated gameplay to create a memorable experience. To the Moon tells the story of two doctors who travel through the memories of people on their deathbeds to make their unfulfilled wishes come true. This time, they strive to fulfill dying Johnny's dream of flying to the moon. The plot is incredibly moving, and the soundtrack perfectly complements it. It's a must-play for fans of story-driven games that play on low-end PCs. In this dreamy 2D puzzle platformer, the protagonist has come unstuck in time. The player must navigate a painterly world where, just like their character, only some things move with time's arrow. Rewinding time and manipulating the timeline are central gameplay mechanics. You can never die, and you never lose. Unlike rogue-type games and grind-heavy open-world RPG titles, Braid treats your time and attention as precious. The game doesn't force you to solve puzzles by halting your progress until you get it right. If you can't figure something out, you can simply play onward and come back when you're ready. This game would run on a toaster. But just in case, there's also a free demo on Steam, so you can try before you buy. There's a lot of debate found throughout the gaming world on whether games need expressive graphics and gameplay to be considered truly great. Undertale firmly plants itself as an indie release that proves that a game can have a fantastic story, fun gameplay, and engaging characters with minimal graphics and effects. Toby Fox created an incredibly imaginative world that spawned a massive cult following thanks to its colorful cast of characters, incredible soundtrack, and fast-paced dodge-based gameplay elements. Anyone who hasn't played Undertale is seriously missing out, and its ability to run well on even the lowest of low-end PCs gives almost anyone a chance to experience it. It's hard for many people to understand the phenomenon of Stardew Valley. How can this indie sandbox RPG be successful when it lacks stunning graphics and extraordinary visual effects? Well, its gameplay is super addicting, resulting in players spending long hours on farm management on their first try. Apart from cultivating crops, you can fish, mine raw materials, or even go to the dungeons in search of valuable treasures. Without a doubt, it's a gem among laptop games. If taking care of plants and animals is your thing, you should definitely check out the list with other titles similar to Stardew Valley. Each demonstrates a different take on the farm sim genre, so everyone will find something for themselves. Debuting in 2012, Far Cry 3 is more than a decade old by this point. In Ubisoft's long history of open-world releases, few garnered as much praise or were as influential as Far Cry 3. A critical and commercial success, the FPS drops players on Rook Islands, a gorgeous but highly dangerous archipelago that does not take kindly to outsiders. Featuring an iconic villain in Vaz and a decent protagonist in Jason Brody, the campaign holds up reasonably well. Although expanded upon by its sequels, Far Cry 3's gameplay is still fun today. The gunplay is responsive, while the exploration benefits from taking place on a big but not overwhelming map. Darkest Dungeon is a 2D, side-scrolling dungeon crawler with a side helping of Lovecraftian horror, Hold the Racism, and a mental health management simulator. As your heroes wind their way through the Stygian abyss, they'll face the dripping claws and rasping moans of the Aeon's damned creatures that dwell beyond the stars. Safeguard them carefully, or you'll find the abyss staring back at you when you least expect it. Darkest Dungeon can be legitimately annoying, but if you love mods like Longest War 4XCOM, this series is a treasure. DD doesn't pull punches, and if you think you've figured the game out, that probably means there's a DLC or difficulty level waiting to kneecap you around the corner. Released in 2012, Torchlight 2 attracted attention for providing a traditional hack-and-slash experience during a time when they were hard to come by. It is hardly surprising that a decade-old game can be run on the PC equivalent of a toaster, especially one that was not even intensive when it debuted. Regardless of its age, Torchlight 2 is still a fantastic dungeon crawler and a must-play for anyone itching to pick up as much loot as digitally possible. The RPG's cartoonish art style is timeless in a similar way to how the early Borderlands games look, set to always be pleasant to the eyes. More importantly, Torchlight 2's gameplay also seems to be immune to aging, provided a player enjoys its classic approach to combat. The next pick on our list is Super Meat Boy, a demanding platformer where you need to rescue your girlfriend from Dr. Fetus. We must say, his name is truly interesting. However, it's not the plot that made it a timeless classic, but its insane level of difficulty and low minimum requirements. Your low-end PC will be enough to run it without any problems, but you need to master the controls to finish some of the levels, as they're as creative as they're crazy. Remember that you should equip yourself with a gamepad because playing it with a keyboard is a hassle. Spelunky is one of the definite indie titles on both PC and console. In terms of influence, the game should be considered in the same league as The Binding of Isaac, Cave Story, and Super Meat Boy. It's a game designed with infinite ways to make the player struggle, but just as many ways to help the player succeed. Sometimes the chips don't fall in favor of Spelunky Guy, but when they do, it's so worth it. The sequel, Spelunky 2, delivers more of the same, but it may require a somewhat more modern system to get working. Spelunky's HD port on Steam, on the other hand, can still run on Windows XP. The game operates smoothly and is still as engrossing as ever. Into the Breach is a turn-based strategy game that takes place on small maps of 8x8 grids. From the makers of FTL, Into the Breach challenges you to beat back waves of attackers in turn-based combat. There are no XCOM-style probability fields to deal with here. You get full transparency into what actions will be taken by both your own characters and the enemies you engage with. Into the Breach launched in 2018, but it's still winning recognition for its unique approach to combat today. Definitely worth checking out. While The Witcher 3 requires a fairly hefty PC to run, the same cannot be said about the older entries in the franchise. considering the original sequel debuted in 2011, The Witcher 2's low PC requirements are not that unexpected. However, the RPG is also very well optimized. Quite a few non-gaming modern laptops are likely to meet the game's recommended criteria, resulting in a decent experience rather than just a serviceable one. Overshadowed as it might be by its more decorated successor, The Witcher 2 is nevertheless a fantastic game by most metrics. Rather than open world, the RPG's campaign is divided into semi-explorable regions, each one containing side quests along with the main story beats. Unsurprisingly, CD Projekt Red's tight writing is in full display throughout The Witcher 2, and an argument could be made that this entry's central storyline is better than the one in its sequel. Industry has tried its hand at a lot of Alien projects over the years, a few of which are even decent. While the majority of these titles take inspiration from the more action-oriented Aliens and Aliens vs. Predator, the franchise's strongest game turns to the 1979 original movie for tips on how to craft a proper sci-fi horror experience that could terrify genre veterans. A direct sequel to the film, Alien Isolation, centers around Ellen Ripley's daughter as she tries to discover what happened to her mother. Naturally, Amanda finds herself stuck in a space station that happens to have a necromorph problem. Alien Isolation nails the most important thing about the franchise: the necromorph is a genuine threat. Throughout most of the campaign, Amanda is very much the prey, and she spends her time trying to hide away from the deadly creature stalking her. Graphically, Creative Assembly designed a fairly impressive game that is not too taxing on the system, which makes sense since the space station is a rather desolate place. In Disco Elysium, you're an alcohol and drug-abusing amnesiac detective who has been hired to solve a murder mystery. This sort of thing happens so often in games, you'd think there'd be some kind of agency in charge of ensuring would-be detectives still knew their own names. As you work to solve a murder, you'll remember things about yourself. You'll also have access to a system of traits with which to flesh out your character. There are 24 skills in the game, and they all have an impact on how the game evolves. Pick the wrong, or right, ones, and you may end up arguing with yourself over the correct course of action. Disco Elysium won Game of the Year from several publications, and it'll run on 15-year-old hardware. Hollow Knight will most certainly appeal to all fans of platformers and of the Dark Souls series. Boss battles and exploration of the map full of mysterious realms are incredibly mesmerizing. Despite its stunning graphics, the game is a perfect choice for owners of budget laptops. 2D platformers are a dime a dozen in the independent scene. They come around so often, they do have a habit of blending together. Consequently, if a game manages to stand out from the crowd, that must mean it is extra special. Celeste is one of those releases. Matt Makes Games title follows Madeline as she tries to scale the eponymous mountain, a journey that serves as a metaphor for her own experiences with things like depression. Celeste is a very difficult game, which makes sense considering the mature themes it tries to tackle. For the most part, platformers tend to prioritize gameplay over story, but this 2018 project is something of an exception since it melts the two together in a way that causes them to be intrinsically linked. In this free-to-play MMORPG, build your character and step into a low-poly medieval wonderland without giving Blizzard a dime. Do you like PvP? Puzzles? Parkour? RuneScape offers a dizzying variety of skills to improve. While the game hails from 2013, publisher Jagex is still actively adding and updating quests. And there are also a lot of ways to play this game. It's a little like Second Life. You can hunt, fish, gather and cook. You can roam around as a murder hobo trademark and reap XP for Slayer quests. If you want to settle in, you can buy and furnish a house. There are no formal classes, you can level each stat to your own liking. Do you want to be a mage? An archer? A paladin? Shape your avatar's powers in precisely the way you want. Initially created by one person, Chris Hunt, Kenshi is an ambitious indie title that has been around for more than a decade. The project takes cues from strategy, survival, and role-playing games, combining them to create a package with basically no peers. Although not much of a looker, Kenshi's rough aesthetic fits its Mad Max-esque universe, all the while ensuring that most modern computers should be able to run the game without much issue. Kenshi strips the open-world concept down to its fundamentals. Players are dropped into a sandbox and essentially given no direction or story to follow. Basically, they are left to their own devices. While overwhelming at first, this level of freedom is the game's best overall feature, and it can create an addictive escape from reality. Team Fortress 2 is free to play on the Steam store, and the game still continues to sit somewhere near the top of the platform's most played titles. It's a multiplayer first-person shooter from Valve, the famed developers that brought the world Counter-Strike, Global Offensive, Half-Life, and Portal. Games like Overwatch might not exist if it weren't for TF2. Even if someone has a basic integrated graphics card like the Intel HD Graphics 630, they will probably meet the minimum and recommended requirements for Team Fortress 2. Although it's aged since its release in 2007, the gameplay holds up well. Nowadays, quite a few of the most popular casual games come with a low barrier for entry. Gang Beasts is a silly physics-based multiplayer title that sees players trying to push each other towards certain doom. Boasting vibrant graphics, Bonelof's game is a crowd-pleaser capable of entertaining both casual and hardcore gamers. Gang Beasts does not require much power under the hood, and the game is likely to be playable on most modern laptops regardless of whether they are intended for gaming or not. As this is solely a multiplayer package, anyone seeking a solo experience should look elsewhere. Released in 2013, Call of Juarez Gunslinger is a Western shooter split into short chapters revolving around famous figures from history. Silas Greaves saunters into a saloon filled with patrons who are, mostly, willing to hear his wild tales, some of which sound too outlandish to be true. Although hardly a graphical powerhouse, Gunslinger's visuals have aged shockingly well, and the same could be said for its gunplay. Although repetitive at times, the campaign shakes things up just enough to keep things interesting. The narrator's big personality also enhances these stories. Cuphead is a great game for someone looking for a game you might fairly call Nintendo hard, particularly if they enjoy its animation. Cuphead's visual aesthetic is unique. It's the only game we've ever seen that mimics the rubber hose animation style of the early 1930s. It also has bullet hell aspects that measure up to legends of the genre. You'll need sharp reflexes to beat this frenetic 2D platformer, but not much in the way of PC horsepower. Its physics are intuitive, and the core gameplay asks you to stretch your creativity and think on your feet to figure out what the boss's powers are and what's going on around you. Thoroughly enjoyable and visually unforgettable. Warframe has been around since 2013, and the game has evolved significantly over the last decade. Since the very start, Digital Extreme's free RPG delivered fast-paced combat that ranked among the online sphere's best options. However, it took a while for the package around the battle system to blossom into something special. Nowadays, Warframe has the content to back up its mechanics. Now, that's not to say the RPG has no flaws, as it is very grind-heavy and does a pretty terrible job of easing in newcomers. However, Warframe can be generally enjoyed without spending a dime, which is not something that can be said for every free-to-play game. While the third entry debuted in 2023, Payday 2 is still extremely popular, to the point of having far more active players on Steam than its successor. Launching in 2013, Overkill's first-person shooter is firmly established as a cornerstone of the multiplayer scene, and part of that can be at least credited to its accessibility. While the game's age shines through its core gameplay, Payday 2's heist-based loop is timeless, and it provides crews with enough freedom to justify an endless grind. At this point, one has to assume that anyone remotely interested in this title has already jumped on board, but if anyone is on the fence, it is still a fun time. Compared to other major 2023 releases like Street Fighter VI, Hogwarts Legacy, Resident Evil 4, Dead Space, and Star Wars Jedi Survivor, Diablo 4 is forgiving when it comes to minimum specs. Nevertheless, a player needs at least a GTX 660 and an i5 2500K to get the game running, which will eliminate most people who do not have a gaming-leaning desktop or laptop. If an action RPG cannot quite get Blizzard's project running, they can always just check out Diablo 3, Reaper of Souls. While the original version of Diablo 3 garnered a lot of criticism, the Reaper of Souls iteration is generally well regarded, to the point that it should have been the entry's launch state. Although not a looker by traditional standards, the game's visuals hold up rather well, provided the cartoonish visuals hit the mark with a player. Sonic the Hedgehog has led a rough life. Nowadays, Sega's legendary mascot has a resume filled with both masterpieces and bottom-of-the-barrel junk, and the latter have dominated the discourse over the last 2 decades. Despite its many failures, when the franchise gets a project right, it tends to hit a home run. Sonic Mania is almost unquestionably the license's best title of the current century, and it was developed by a team that previously worked on fan games. The developer's experience shines through the game's retro visuals, tight level design, great music, and classic gameplay. Sonic Mania pays homage to the Blue Blur's Genesis era in a way that feels fresh rather than a complete retread, although that might have to do with the fact Sega had largely ignored 2D Sonic except for a few levels in games like Sonic Generations. Some games punish players for dying, docking them cash, items, and XP. But with Hades, there are no corpse runs, dying is the point. It feels entirely appropriate for a button-mashing gonzo roguelike about the semi-immortal son of Hades, Greek god of the underworld. Every playthrough is different, and you can still have new interactions with NPCs after playing through to the final boss. Dark Souls players and early Super Mario World lovers will recognize the routine of counting iframes while getting used to the game's unforgiving timing. But while the timing is demanding, Hades does a really good job of making you feel like a BAMF from the moment you pick up the controller. You don't have to be good at games to land epic wombo combos and dance between the bullet hell raindrops. Players battle their way across 3 planes of the ancient Grecian underworld as Zagreus, son of Hades, collecting power-ups and leveling up abilities before facing the final boss. Weapons and items stay unlocked after Zagreus dies, which factors into the game's highly customizable difficulty settings. Victory and defeat both end in death, beginning the cycle anew. If Earth's deep waters can inspire chills, then a distant moon's seas are the stuff of nightmares. Barotrauma taps into humanity's innate fear of the unknown by locking players in a submarine and tasking them with exploring an ocean riddled with creatures that would not look out of place in a Lovecraftian story. Blending survival horror with RPG elements, Barotrauma's brilliance really shines through when co-op is in play. Undertale's game supports up to 16 players, all of whom would be assigned roles within the submarine. Although certainly indie in presentation, the project nonetheless looks great and stylish, and it manages to produce some real scares despite being presented from an angle that does not facilitate horror particularly well. Barotrauma is an intense, suffocating experience that will test a team's communication, competence, and foresight, and its low barrier of entry when it comes to specs means that most people should be able to tag along for the ride. What do you get when you combine Mario, Minecraft, and an ant farm? You guessed it, Terraria. It's a 2D side-scrolling platformer, but Terraria also leans heavily on base building and crafting. Players forge enchanted armor and weapons with crazy powers in order to defeat a huge roster of bosses ranging from trivial to challenging to deeply annoying. Meanwhile, each map has a creeping awfulness called the Crimson or the Corruption that players must cleanse before it takes over the world. Readers recommended Terraria, and we heartily agree. Like Minecraft, much of the game takes place underground, and you can greatly enrich your experience and your character by building little towns and inviting NPCs to live in them. Also like Minecraft, it's got a vibrant modding community. Not only does Terraria have a ton of Steam Workshop mods, there's an officially integrated mod manager, Tmod Loader, with an overlapping set of mods and its own save file directory. Special secret world seeds like for the worthy and not the bees. Give players access to new, tougher worlds with outrageous rules. Many of the most popular video games have low PC requirements. It's not always about frame rate or graphics, which is why a game like Minecraft is widespread. This block-building game is nothing short of a phenomenon, and a huge part of its appeal is its accessibility. Minecraft is a game for everyone, and that is reflected in both its creativity-driven content and its undemanding PC requirements. Orcs Must Die and Orcs Must Die 2 are some of our favorite titles for mindless slaughtery goodness. There's an army of marauding orcs coming, and, you see, they must die. This hybrid tower defense/action game tasks you with burning, blasting, freezing, smashing, dissolving, shooting, and generally wreaking mayhem against wave after wave of orcs, trolls, ogres, and other various bad guys. It's easy to learn and sometimes surprisingly difficult to master. OMD excels at offering a variety of fun ways to end monsters in style. Spring-loaded traps that hurl creatures through the air? Check. Acid sprayers and arrow traps? Check. Trinkets to transform you into a massive ogre, hurl fireballs, or turn orcs into chickens? Check. So, did you like the games I recommended? So leave your like, subscribe to the channel to follow me and activate the bell because I post a lot of videos on this channel and you can't miss it. I would like to remind you that in the description we have a list of different products that can make your gaming experience much better. If you want to buy, the link will be in the description. Anyway, thank you very much for following me this far and until next time, bye.